Judges ends with a statement, "In those days there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes." Now this statement might strike you as describing a negative or a positive situation. I first read it many years ago while flipping through the Bible, just that sentence, and at the time my first impression was of a sort of utopian comment. After all, the people of Israel weren't supposed to have any earthly king. God was supposed to be their king. So my mind leapt to the positive. They didn't need external or secular laws or authority to do what was right. Everyone had a conscience. Everyone believed in God. So they did what was right. After all, that's the way it was supposed to be. Unfortunately, years ago, as I also studied these words in context, I couldn't see this as a positive description of reality. It might be the way it was supposed to be, but it wasn't the way things worked out in real life. Yes, the book that immediately follows Judges is Ruth, and it's full of good people behaving well. The book of Judges is mostly about people behaving badly. The judges themselves were incredibly violent. Deborah came the closest to our idea of a judge. She sat under a tree and gave counsel. Now, perhaps the other judges did that as well in their spare time, but we're not told really about it. And Deborah's real fame and position as a judge came from leading a brutal military expedition against the enemy. In the midst of that, another woman is celebrated when she violates the ethics of hospitality and kills a sleeping guest. In a particularly deplorable action, the men in one tribe of judges wiped out a whole culture of non-Israelite people simply because they were peaceful and prosperous. And they did this because the tribe thought, well, this is an easy steal. We get their land. We get everything they have. Another time, a group wiped out a whole community just to keep the unmarried women as wives for one of the tribes. What these people did wasn't right. Later, Israelites knew it wasn't right. The word right is misleading. In this sentence, my mind thought of right as equivalent to goodness, righteousness, integrity, kindness, justice, mercy, love, all of those fine things. And while I'm sure there were many good people in the time of the judges, what we mostly hear about the ones who did what they wanted to do, which is unfortunately what many people interpret as right. Over and over I see the same attitude in society today, that whatever people have to do to get what they want or what they think they need is somehow justified in their eyes, even if doing so takes away someone else's rights, wants, or needs. Sometimes people think that however they express their hatred or fear is weirdly righteous. One scholar on the Book of Judges sees the entire collection of stories as a sort of apology and explanation for why Israel really needed a king. I don't know if the apology was directed at their ancestors, at themselves, at their religious leaders, at God, or to all of them at the same time. But at the heart of what the book could be saying is this: can't you tell we really needed a king? We really needed some earthly authority and control to tell us what was right and to make us do it. It wasn't that they didn't have laws and customs about what was right and wrong. They had the Ten Commandments. They had other teachings of God. For many centuries, these were passed down in oral form, but oral tradition was very strong, especially at that time. It was very accurate. They had no excuses for their behavior. They knew what God had said was the right thing to do. And of course, that's the problem with saying everyone should act according to what they think is right. Everyone doesn't actually agree on what is right. There are people who get upset at one thing but ignore others. One example is how Jesus would point out that some people are meticulous about certain things like tithing their mint and their dill and their cumin, but they ignore the weightier matters of law, justice, and mercy. That's still true today. Even with external laws and authority, people do what they interpret as right, and we humans seem capable of rationalizing almost any behavior. So law and order developed in Israelite society. This included behavior in society, but laws and regulations got increasingly specific, and some might say picky, in regard to religious behavior. Now, specifics can be very comforting. You don't have to think about your conscience if you convince yourself that you've done enough, if you've just checked off the boxes. You know, the mint and dill and cumin, even if you ignore law, justice, and mercy, because there weren't any specifics on how to do all of that. I've sometimes said the Ten Commandments should not be regarded as stopping places, but as directional signs towards attitudes and behaviors. The prophets, Jesus, and other religious leaders would struggle to get people to concentrate on the spirit of the law, to think, to have a conscience, to have an attitude of doing what's right instead of checking off boxes. The book of Job was written long after the period of Judges. It also partially kicks around the notion of human goodness. The debate boils down to whether humans are even capable of being good without external reward or punishment. By the way, the book only raises the question, it doesn't really answer it. And perhaps that's because we each have to hammer out the answer for ourselves and for our own behavior. One of the problems with the letter of the law approach is the belief that this alone makes us feel that we've done enough. You remember the child's prayer, "Oh God, please make the bad people good and the good people nice." Well, obeying the letter of the law might make us barely tolerable in society, but it actually doesn't make us nice, nor does it actually mean that we're good. Step forward from Old Testament times to the Apostle Paul, and that's actually part of by the way, the lectionary reading from last week, the letter to the Galatians. "Now before faith came," he wrote, "we were imprisoned under the law until faith would be revealed. Therefore the law was our disciplinarian until Christ came, so that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer subject to a disciplinarian." This is in essence the same discussion, especially with the translator's choice of the word disciplinarian. In Paul's time, law had become burdensome, not the moral part, except for the people who didn't want to be moral, of course. The moral part of the law was attracting large numbers of Gentiles, actually, who wanted that kind of teaching in their faith. The ritual portion, however, had become a burden. Few people could follow everything. I'm sure there were many ways that people viewed the law, but in the extreme, some people anxiously feared that because they couldn't do all the little regulations and rituals, then they would be condemned. And others patted themselves on the back thinking how righteous they were because they did so many of them. Neither attitude helps us be spiritually healthy. One belief sees God as unyielding and ready to condemn you forever for not washing your hands the prescribed way. The other person is so full of themselves that they have no room for God except as a merchant providing what they think they've earned. By the way, Paul was sometimes interpreted as saying anything goes. That is not accurate. He believed in good, kindly, moral behavior. His letters are full of theology and for directions on how to be a good follower of Jesus. And the irony is that it's even at times a disciplinarian of sorts to the churches. But he was trying to get beyond the law as being a path to God. I really like what I've read as the best understanding of the law, which is a gift from God to help us live at our best as individuals and as a society. The law isn't about jumping through circus hoops to show that we're obedient, and the law isn't a points reward program to get what we want. As Christians, we put our whole reliance on Jesus. At our best, we think and try to model ourselves after his example. We can't do that if our fear or our prejudice, our hatred or our greed is more powerful to us than God and the law of love. We can't follow Jesus' example if we're patting ourselves on the back and thinking we're more righteous than anyone else. I read a story the other day. A Sunday school teacher said that in the Garden of Eden, God chided Adam for having eaten the apple, and Adam explained how Eve had given it to him. In other words, eating the apple, he thought it really wasn't his fault because it was Eve's fault. She was the guilty party. A kid in the class called out, "You mean Adam was the first tattletale?" I hadn't thought of it that way, but Adam was a tattletale, trying to shove responsibility for his actions onto someone else. Eve blamed the snake, and in one expanded folk-style version of the story, the snake blamed God for making it that way in the first place. I do believe humans are capable of governing their own behavior. I object to saying anything different, because then we don't have to accept responsibility, and that's a dangerous and slippery slope. We need to be responsible and say, yes, I govern my behavior. I make me do what is right. We can use the law to guide us as part of our reason, part of our conscience. We don't want to make the mistake of substituting what we want or what we feel for doing what is the right and moral thing. To have a third party with time-tested wisdom and inspiration is a really good resource. There are plenty of those resources, but we pay special attention to the ones coming out of our faith tradition. In the end, however, we can live as those who don't need laws to force us to do what is right, good, just, kind, and loving. Amen.